This ESPN podcast is brought to you by Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. Visit geico.com.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects. The BS Report. The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report, taping this on a Tuesday morning, West Coast time. We're going to do a little more football. We did Cousin Sal and I guessed the lines yesterday on the BS Report. If you missed that, today we have Aaron Schatz and Chad Millman, two old friends of the BS Report. Aaron, if you still have 2 days to get his Football Outsiders, which you can get. Tell us how you can get it, Aaron.
Football Outsiders Almanac. You can go to our site, footballoutsiders.com, to get the PDF version or the physical book, which is $12.50 for the PDF, $22.95 for the book, or it's also on Amazon. And for the first time this year, we actually did a Kindle version, which was hard as heck to get the tables to work right, but we made it happen for all the Kindle people.
Nice. And you and I have one thing in common from last year. We both sucked making picks and predictions. And
so did everybody. Yeah,
so did everybody. I feel good. Sal found a great article that we talked about yesterday in the podcast about how it was a really, really especially wonky year with how well the favorites did. And I think they covered over 52% of the games, which is almost unprecedented for this century. And
I'll tell you that our preseason picks were good, but yeah, during the season, almost all the smart, quote unquote, smart sites were horrible in the first half of the year.
Right. And history says this is the third really super duper wonky season we've had from a favorites covering type of standpoint. The next year it reverts and it goes very underdog heavy. And that means we're going to see a lot of weird stuff, hopefully. What are you guys projecting?
I mean, actually, as far as for the season as a whole, I mean, our projections are fairly constant, actually, because some of the up and down has actually calmed down a little bit from what it was a few years ago. It may not seem like that because we still had teams going up and down last year. Washington collapsed, Minnesota collapsed, Atlanta, Houston. But it actually, in general, the same teams have been more consistently good year after year than I think we were seeing 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, the best example of that is the AFC, where, do you know a single person who's picking a team other than Denver or New England to win that conference?
You might be talking to one of them.
Hit me. What's your team?
Well, I haven't decided yet. I still have 2 more days. I'm taking it down to the wire. This is how I used to operate in college with term papers. I'm really looking hard at San Diego.
I like San Diego a lot. Our projections on them came out a lot higher than the conventional wisdom, mainly based on the idea that they'll keep their offense. The players are at the right age to keep the growth from last year. If you look now in retrospect for Phillip Rivers, it looks like 2012 is the weird year, not 2013. It's not that he was suddenly good last year. It's that he was suddenly bad 2 years ago.
Yep.
And the defense should improve because in general, defense regresses towards the mean a lot more than offense does, unless, let's say, you lose your best linebacker and your best defensive lineman, 2 best defensive linemen leave in free agency, and Jerry Jones runs your team, in which case the defense is probably also horrible again.
Right. And they spent the summer and spring addressing it. They have a healthy and motivated Dwight Freeney, who had a great article that I read on one of the sites the other day. Super confident, said this was the best team that he's played on. And that's including all the Indianapolis teams he's played on. I like the coach. I thought Rivers was good last year. They have some, couple guys who can make plays. They have the young tight end, Ladarius Green, although I feel like he has the fantasy pox on him, but I think they're in the mix.
He's totally oversleepered, man. He is oversleepered. He is the most oversleeper of all time.
He's an awaker. I guess maybe whatever the reverse sleeper is, he's the opposite of that. But I was thinking like year after year we see this. There's maybe 7 teams that can win the Super Bowl. And we realize that either some point during the season or after the fact. And it's 6 teams that we know for sure are Super Bowl contenders. Then there's that one weird team that catches hot at the right time in December, and all of a sudden they're in the mix. Who would your 7 be right now?
And by the way, I would, listen, first of all, I would say that because we don't know who that quote-unquote hot January team is going to be until we get to January, it means a lot more teams can win the Super Bowl than we tend to think. But last year was a chalk year where the best teams won. The teams we all expected to win generally won, except for, when Aaron Rodgers got hurt. And I think more years, tend to end up like that. What we've had the last few years with teams like Baltimore and the Giants is a historical exception to the general rule. So if you say who are the teams that are the real Super Bowl contenders, number 1 and 2 is Denver and New England, because it just seems like the competition in that conference is not there. So the odds of them making the Super Bowl is much stronger.
Yep.
I can't see a situation. It's very hard to see a situation where the best team in the regular season in the AFC is not either Denver or New England. But obviously you can see a situation where they get upset in the playoffs. But in the regular season, those are the two best teams. And then I would say Seattle, Green Bay, Philadelphia. My two kind of surprises are Chicago and San Diego. And then I would give San Francisco an asterisk because I think they're going to struggle early in the year more than people realize. But when they have Bowman and Alden Smith back, and they've gotten used to the new stadium a little bit, and most importantly, they have Alden Smith back, that they're really poised to go on one of those wild card runs. So I'd make those my 8 teams.
So you think San Francisco has the best wonk team potential, if we call it that?
I'm sorry, New Orleans, that's 9 teams.
Oh. So you're throwing New Orleans in there. Interesting. Because people seem conflicted on them. Some people love them. Other people think they're a little overvalued.
Well, I mean, the offense is the offense. I'm pretty sure it's going to be pretty good. And I don't see any reason to see a big amount of defensive decline there. You add Jarius Byrd. We do know that the Ryan brothers know what they're doing when it comes to running defenses, and they don't when it comes to running offenses. So, I see the Saints as and that division doesn't look very strong. We think Carolina will fall apart. I think Bill Barnwell has made all those points pretty well.
Right.
Tampa Bay is a big question mark. This whole Josh McCown thing just seems like a mistake. And Atlanta, the defense for Atlanta is still young and not that good and has no pass rush. So it looks like New Orleans should trample.
I like Tampa more than most people.
There's a lot of really heavy positive indicators there.
Yeah. Let's talk about
it. And there's heavy negative indicator on the quarterback. And then subjectively, there's the fact that usually new coaching staff actually means a step backwards because you're learning new schemes and stuff. On the other hand, there's no objective variable in any kind of projection system for the amount that Tampa Bay hated their coach last year.
I created it.
They hated that guy.
No, I created the variable. It's called wins above Raheem Morris. And I thought Greg Schiano was going to benefit from that, but he was as big of a disaster as Raheem Morris was. But Lovie Smith is a good coach. I don't think he's the best coach in the league, but he was 18 games over 500 with the Bears, and that team had 4 double-digit seasons when he was there, and they made the Super Bowl once, and they almost made it twice, and that guy's competent. I think he's going to have a huge impact on them.
Yeah, listen, I mean, when you look back in history and you look at coaches with a great historical record hired to their second team, the record is not that good. But subjectively, when we look at what we know, forget numbers. Let's look at what we know about the personalities of that team, Lovie Smith's personality, Schiano's personality. My God, it seems like there should be some improvement there.
And we saw it last year with Andy Reid. I think that's a good example of going from a horrible coach to a good one, a competent one. And that was one of the reasons they did well. They had an easy schedule. They obviously had some guys they added, but
they were really unlucky last year. I mean, when they were 0-8, they were the best 0-8 team in the history of our numbers. I mean, I know that's not something Schiano wants to put on his resume. Yeah.
Tampa, right? Yeah.
Tampa Bay does not want to, Schiano's not putting on his resume, I ran the best 0-8 team of all time. But it does indicate they were better than 4-12 last year. They were not a 4-12 team. They were like a 7-9 team with horrible luck and horrible coaching.
What do you like about Chicago?
I love Trestman's offense. I love that they finally got the offensive line to work, and the receivers. And as far as defense goes, I mean, both regular regression towards the mean and the plexiglass principle, the idea that a defense that fell apart as much as Chicago's did last year should tend to rebound. And the other thing is run defense is less consistent from year to year than pass defense. And what was really a problem last year for Chicago was run defense. And that's easier to fix than pass defense. So those are all really positive indicators for the Bears.
Barno and I have talked about this a little, and I'm going to ask you about it too. Do you worry that I guess it's not a worry because who cares? But in the old days, it was really fun to pick the regression teams and the teams that were going to make the leap. And I felt like there was kind of a real science and an art to it. And I liked doing it. It was one of my favorite things about doing the football preview. And now it seems like the way we digest the NFL is so sophisticated that everybody sniffs these regression teams out in July. I mean, everybody thinks Carolina and Kansas City is going to suck. Do you almost feel like is it become easier, or does it just look too easy and those teams are going to surprise us? What's going to happen?
Well, I think it's become easier. It's been that way in all sports. I mean, not to be egotistical, but isn't my site a little bit of the reason for that? And
yeah, I would
Baseball
agree.
Prospectus and John Hollinger and Kevin Pelton and Rob Nyer and all of us who've been doing this stuff, we figured out a little bit where the regression shows up. And now that's easier to spot. And when you take all the people who used to write for me who are now writing all over the internet,
Yep.
Just the way that BP people forget about writing all over the internet, they're all in front offices now,
Yep.
right? Understanding this stuff. So, yeah, but there will still be things that surprise. There will still absolutely be things that surprise. I mean, obviously, look, last year we thought Houston was going to decline. We didn't think they were going 2-14.
Yeah, there's the year from hell team every year. And
Yeah.
there's so many signs pointing towards San Francisco. The way you approach that is kind of the way I'm thinking about them too. It might be a 2 months from hell. And they might just be, they might not be dead, but they might be like in a semi-coma. And then when they start getting dudes back second half of the year, they might be lingering and sneaking into the playoffs. And then all of a sudden everyone's afraid of them. But I think that is the team that if you're just looking for the year from hell team that would shock everyone. And we've seen this year after year. We saw it with Indy the year Peyton Manning went down. We saw it last year with Houston. It happens every year to somebody. And, is it inconceivable that San Francisco could go 4-12? From what we've seen the last 7 years, it's not.
If you think about a subjective, I don't think it's going to happen. I think the first half from hell is more like 4-4, not 1-7. But if you're looking for a subjective reason that goes past numbers for why that it makes a realistic story, this whole Jim Harbaugh, does he want to coach another team? Does he not get along with the front office thing? Right? That's the kind of weird ghost in the room that you could see maybe being the reason, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think that it's more likely that they go, 4-4 in the first half, 6-2 in the second half, and go into the playoffs red hot.
Well, that was one of my biggest reasons because
you want to know who I think is going to be the hell team? Arizona.
Yeah, although they weren't a playoff team last year, but they did win 10.
Right. We talk about how the best team that didn't make the playoffs and 10-6 last year.
Yep.
That defense was been torn apart by injury. Patrick Peterson's wonderful, but in general, that defense has been torn apart by injury. Carson Palmer is totally on the. You could totally see him go on Matt Schaub.
Yep.
Logan Thomas is completely not ready to start.
And they've had some bad things happen already. And that's one of the indicators with the year from hell team is when a couple of things happened even before the season. They had, they lost Darryl Washington for the whole year, and then Dockett goes down. And Palmer playing 6 games against that division is a little frightening too, because whether the Rams probably aren't going to be that good because of the Sean Hill thing, although I'm not sure he's worse than Bradford. But their defense is going to be good, and they're going to be tough to play. And Palmer playing 60% of his games against that, or 40% against that division is frightening.
there's a reasonable chance that Hill is 90% of what Bradford was going to be.
Yeah.
The difference is with Bradford, you had upside that you don't really have with Hill. There was always the possibility that this was the year Bradford took a leap. There really is no possibility. And the other thing is, God forbid Hill gets hurt.
Yep.
Oh, boy.
Right. Well, with San Francisco, they've had so many things happen already. And I do think the Harbaugh thing was interesting because he clearly sniffed it out. And there's something about his situation there that he started wondering if maybe there was a better situation. And all it takes at this point for them is one more bad thing, and I think they hit a tipping point. Like, let's say Kaepernick sprains his MCL and he's out for 3 weeks.
Oh, well, we know that would be because their backup is Blaine Gabbert, dude. Come on.
Who was probably the worst player of the preseason, right?
Awful.
Is it inconceivable that the Eagles could go 14-2 and be the NFC Super Bowl team?
No, not inconceivable at all.
Yeah. Is that the team that you think, if you had to pick a team that was going to make a 4-win jump this year from last year, would you pick the Eagles or would you pick someone else?
I
guess the Bears would be in there for you.
Green Bay is the team.
Oh. They'd have to get the 12-3-1.
But that one's too obvious. That's obvious because none of us think of Green Bay as the 8-7-1 team.
Yeah.
We think of them as the team they were before Aaron Rodgers got hurt. And then we ignore the fact that their defense was pretty terrible last year and should be better and more healthy this year, on top of Aaron Rodgers being back. So obviously, the main candidate for that is Green Bay, but it's too obvious to even name them.
Right. So Philly, maybe.
San Diego.
San Diego was 9-7 last year.
Yeah. I could totally foresee a situation where San Diego and Denver are both 13-3.
I could too. San Diego plus
Kansas
5.
City, with a Kansas City decline, Oakland is terrible. St. Louis and Arizona not as good as people think they are.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that Denver has to be bad for San Diego to be good.
San Diego plus 550 to win the AFC West.
Yeah, isn't there always a situation where the team that you expected to run away with the division wins the wild card because they lose some tiebreaker to the surprise team or something?
Yeah. And, Manning could miss 3 games. Like, who knows? I'm not sold on Denver winning that division. I think Denver's going to be one of the best 6 teams. But you might have to – it might be a situation like it's been with Seattle and San Francisco the last couple of years where, you have 2 monster teams in the same division. That's just the way it is. What are you thinking about the Pats?
Listen, I think that for us Patriots fans to think they're the best team in the conference is wishful thinking. But it's wishful thinking that has a basis in reality. I think Denver is clearly the best team. They had the best offense. Offense carries over best from year to year. They're getting Ryan Clady back. They added pieces to their defense. They're the best team in the conference. It's not close. The probability that they're going to be the best team in the conference, it's not close. But you certainly, listen, we've been making the case for San Diego. But the case for the Patriots being actually the best team in the conference is stronger because it starts with Darrelle Revis.
Yep.
Right? It starts with Revis changing the defense, plus you bring back Wilfork and Mayo. So now you have an above-average defense. And people forget that the Patriots offense in the second half of last year was back to being the Patriots offense that we know and love. Tom Brady was 3rd in passing DVOA over the second half of the season behind Peyton Manning and Nick Foles. Okay, his struggles were just the first half of the season. Even after Gronkowski tore his ACL, the offense continued to play superlative. It was just the first half of last year where they struggled.
And the Pats had a borderline year from hell, too. So basically they went 12-4. You think like Hernandez, Wilfork goes down, Mayo goes down, Gronk.
Yeah, because they won ridiculous close games.
Right.
The Cleveland game, the New Orleans game, those were ridiculous comebacks in a way that is really you couldn't continue doing over a long period of time. But they're better this year, so they're not going to need to continue doing that.
Yeah, you know how much I love DVOA. I did a lot of research last year, this summer, because I could not accept sucking again with my picks. It just wasn't going to allow it to happen again. I was shocked by a couple DVOA numbers, one of which was how good the Jets' rush defense is. Now, you said that doesn't translate from year to year, right?
Right, as well as pass defense. There's almost no consistency in it, which I think is pretty astonishing. But then again, let's look at the players involved. We know Richardson and Wilkinson are really great players. If they're healthy, that should be a strong run defense again. But there's no secondary, and passing is just more important than running. Listen, here's passing and running in a nutshell. Adrian Peterson had one of the 5 best seasons a running back has ever had in the history of the league, and his team barely made it into the playoffs as a wild card in 2012.
Right.
Passing is more important than running.
Well, the Eagles, passing offense 5th DVOA, rushing offense 1st DVOA. And that was year 1 of the Chip Kelly experience, and they didn't get a totally full season.
I'm now going to go back on what I just said to you.
Okay.
The Eagles are fascinating because they completely are the vanguard when it comes to the speed and no huddle thing. But they've gone way back into the past when it comes to pass rush ratio. They run more than any other team in the league, and their passes are almost all either screens or deep downfield. They pass deep downfield more than almost any other team, which is it's almost like a 70s offense.
Yeah.
Speeded up with screens at it.
The other thing that I'm interested in with the DVOA that I think is sneaky under the radar, you have the schedule for the offenses they went against and the defenses they went against, which I like more than the schedule because it's interesting is sometimes the offensive numbers can be out of whack if you're going against terrible defenses or whatever. I was shocked. The Bucs went against the second best offenses or they had the second toughest offensive schedule in the league and the third toughest defensive schedule in the league. They had a monster schedule last year on top of all the other stuff that happened. I really think that that's a sleeper.
And the other thing, here's the problem, Josh McCown. There's no way for someone like me. There's no way for someone like me who looks at regression and looks at long-term trends to believe that Josh McCown is going to be even an average starting quarterback this year. This is a guy who was in the UFL 3 or 4 years ago. It screams of that 1 year Damon Heward had, where he had no interceptions. And then they handed him the starting job the next year, and he was terrible.
Okay, you're throwing him in the Damon Heward, Rob Johnson, Scott Mitchell group?
Mitchell was better than people give him credit for, and I will never throw him in the Rob Johnson group because that would involve sacking him 6 times since we started recording this podcast.
And then the other thing I noticed with the schedules, everyone talked about how easy Kansas City's schedule was last year. Denver's schedule was just as easy. I mean, they had a cream puff schedule, right?
The difference is they destroyed their cream puff schedule.
True. I'm just saying. Would be nice if, and I think the Pats have a similarly easy schedule to what Denver had last year. I think there's a lot of signs, and I'm afraid to pick it or say it because I don't want to jinx the Pats season, but there's a lot of signs toward a monster Pats season. When you look at all the people they added, just the schedule they have, I think the division's going to stink. I don't know. If you're using the corollary that they've kind of mirrored the Spurs over the last, really over the Belichick era. They might have one last great season in them with Brady, and I think this could be this season. Whereas, the Spurs last year had that one last great Duncan season. This might be the last great Brady season.
I honestly subscribe more to the Bill Parcells, Billy Bean way of thinking of.
Okay.
Parcells always just said, just get into the tournament.
Yep.
And Billy Bean's strategy is always just be as good as possible every year and then hope that things go your way in the playoffs. And they're more likely to go your way if you're a better team. Patriots have put one of the top 5 or 6 teams in the league out there almost every year for a dozen years.
Yep.
For 10 years, because for a dozen years, since 2003. And they haven't won it all in a decade, but they've come so close, like Philadelphia for a long time, like Pittsburgh. The difference is Pittsburgh made it over the hump a little bit more often. But the best thing to do is to put a great team out there every year. And right now, that's what Denver and New England are doing, and Seattle and New Orleans and Green Bay. So, I think there are lots of reasons to believe the Patriots are going to have the story of a great team. I just think there are more reasons to believe that the Broncos are going to have the story of a great team. Besides, if you write narrative, doesn't Peyton Manning goes out on top just like John Elway? DeMarcus Ware finally wins a ring. Aren't those great narratives?
Yeah. I call it the circle. You just want to be in the circle in January. There's like 6 or 7 teams that have a chance and the one wild card weird team. And as long as you're in that mix, everyone has an equal chance, basically, because football's gotten really weird. Last question. Seattle. People, it's almost like with a back-to-back champ thing. People have now just assumed that back-to-back champions don't happen anymore, that it's an impossibility. Why couldn't Seattle? What is it that scares you about Seattle heading into this year? Why can't they repeat?
The reason they can't repeat is because it's hard to win in general, and there are other good teams. There's nothing special about repeating in my mind. I don't think there's anything special about it. What you've had in the last few years are great teams after a championship that were upset in the first round of the playoff. But you can't tell me the 15-1 Packers of 2010 were not a great team just because they got upset in their first playoff game. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, there's nothing that stands in Seattle's way except for the same thing that stands in Green Bay's way and Philadelphia's and San Francisco's and New Orleans, which is that they have a lot more competition than the Broncos and the Patriots do. We have the Broncos as our most likely Super Bowl champion, something like 16.5% of our simulation. We have Green Bay at like 9.5 and Seattle at like 9. I mean, we have Seattle third. There's a good chance. I mean, 9% doesn't sound like a good chance, but that's the third highest chance in the league. It's a pretty good chance. That's a great team, and it's a young team. And unlike Baltimore a couple of years ago or the Giants in 2007, it doesn't look like a fluke. They've been that good for a couple of years. They've been the number one team in our ratings for 2 years, and they're young.
Well, we will see. Check out Aaron on footballoutsiders.com. You can still have time to get his manual. That is such a good preparation for the season. And he also, they do the picks every week. The DVOA column on Tuesdays is a must read. He's been on the BS Report. I think this is like year 7 for you. Always fun to have you on. Good luck with the season.
Thanks, man. And you too. And listen, again, obviously, I hope we're talking in January about our team winning it all. It's more likely we're talking about Denver and Seattle again.
Yeah, well, we can always hope. One last great Brady season. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Got it.
Before we get to our next guest, a word from our friends at Subway.
Fuel your training routine with protein-packed footlongs at Subway, like the turkey breast or oven-roasted chicken, made the way you say with all of your favorite fresh veggies on your choice of freshly baked bread. Subway, train hard, eat fresh.
All right, as promised, the editor-in-chief of ESPN Magazine, ESPN.com. I don't, you have so many titles now, I don't even know what's going on. I just know you're the most powerful man in the company. Chad Millman, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you. I appreciate the introduction.
You love gambling. I love gambling. That's how we became friends. Who do you like this year?
That is exactly it.
Who do you like? What's your favorite bet?
So here's what I've been saying all along, and I've said this in the magazine. I've said this on the radio. I've said this to anybody who will listen, and now the numbers are starting to back it up, is that speaking specifically about futures, I loved the New Orleans Saints way back when the futures were announced. They were about 14-1 or so. And if you look back over the last 13 years, teams that are outside, that sort of sneak into that double-digit range, anywhere from really 15 to 30-1, are the teams that bring the most value, but they're also the teams that end up winning the Super Bowl. In the last 13 years, I think it's only 3 times that teams that were in the single digits ended up winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
One of those was the Seahawks. That was like, they started at 10-1, and then when the season, right before the season began, went into 8-1. So now the Saints, after all this conversation, are 7-1. We had them on the cover of the magazine as winning the Super Bowl, going to the Super Bowl. I definitely think they'll be the NFC representative in the Super Bowl. So to me, that was the most exciting team to think about. Now we're getting into the season, and you see the Saints line, and it's moved from Falcons -1.5 of the opening line that was way back when they first posted them. Now the Saints are at -3, so you've seen a 4.5-point swing in that game.
I love that you just put the Saints in the Super Bowl. You didn't even hesitate. They're just in.
There's no hesitation. I feel strongly about this because I feel like their defense is going to be more aggressive. I think they're going to be much more focused on turnovers than they've been in the past. I love Rob Ryan. Who doesn't love Rob Ryan? And I think you saw a huge difference in the way they played with Sean Payton last year, and it wasn't something that was just you recognize the value of a head coach. You see why he's one of those top 3 head coaches that people talk about, because they're just a better team when he's on the field and he's influencing them.
What are the Sharps saying? You talk to Sharps. You talk to dudes that have names of cities as their first name. You talk to guys who use aliases when they have conversations. What are they saying?
For the futures, now Sharps generally don't love playing in the futures bet because there isn't a ton of value for them. But they liked New Orleans when New Orleans was a little bit longer at about 14 and 12 to 1. A lot of public action has moved New Orleans down to 7 to 1. There was some talk about Cincinnati because Cincinnati was in that 20 to 30 to 1 range. Philadelphia was another team that was getting some action in that 20 to 30 to 1 range. The team that's most interesting is Chicago, because you can talk to some people who say this is the year Chicago's going to go over that 8.5 win total that they're posted at and sort of be in the right range at 20 to 30 to 1. And there's other people like me who think there's no way the Bears are going over 8.5 wins, and there's no way they put money on the Bears. But that's also because I'm from Chicago, and this is an emotional hedge I just don't want to make.
Well, I just had Aaron Schatz on, and him and I both like one team. The other team that he liked was Chicago. Cousin Sal also likes Chicago. They're 26 to 1 to win the Super Bowl right now. I don't see it with the defense. I don't like their division either. I don't like their conference.
I don't see it either. And I know why Aaron is doing it, and he's got numbers that will back it up. Essentially what it comes down to is, do you like Detroit in that division, or do you like Chicago in that division?
What about Green Bay?
I don't think, because you got to think about what is the schedule those two teams are facing, right? And essentially they're going to be facing each other and facing the other teams in their division. I don't see the Bears beating the Packers twice. I see them probably splitting with the Lions. And to be honest, a lot of wise guys have been talking about Minnesota as we've switched into season win totals here, but they've been talking about Minnesota as a team that they expect to be on the rise. They've got an easy division schedule, the second easiest road division schedule, and they expect that defense, which was so bad, amongst the worst in the NFL, can only get better with Mike Zimmer coaching it, coming from the Bengals. So they feel like it'll be a lot more competitive.
They were 20 to 1 to win the division. Sal and I both love that bet. I think Barnwell might even be in on that bet. Now that's dropped to 13 to 1, I still like it. I think anyone can win that division. I think it's wide open.
Well, I don't think anyone can win that division. I think the Packers are going to win that division. But I do think that anyone can come in second in that division. I see no value in taking the Lions or the Bears in that division because the Vikings could be a player.
Right. I think 11-5 or 10-6. There could be like a 3-way 10-6 tie. It could be one of those funky things where the best team doesn't win the division but still has the same record as the other. Who the hell knows?
Well, I just feel like the Packers in that division, they're going to win 12 games. And this is going to be great on Thursday night to see sort of the first test case for them. But the Packers are going to run away with that division, and nobody else is really going to matter.
I'm not as high on their defense. I'm not as high on their coach. I'm not willing to just pencil them in. Keep my guard up.
I would, as long as Aaron Rodgers is playing, I have no faith in anybody else in that division.
I'm worried. I've said this. I'm worried about the Olivia Munn thing. I think she weakens legs.
That's
Very
true.
sexual person. Aaron might not have had to deal with anything like that before. 45 to 1, San Diego to win the Super Bowl. Why isn't that the best value?
I love San Diego. The wise guys love San Diego. What's interesting about San Diego is, because they figured out the Broncos last year, right?
Yep.
There's nobody who thinks that the Chiefs are going to be that much better than San Diego, or that the Chiefs couldn't figure out, that the Chargers couldn't figure out Kansas City. So then you're thinking about, all right, what can this team do? The challenge is you got to get whatever you're getting with them, at least from a season win total perspective, in the first 10 weeks of the season. Because you get to that bye after week 10, and the last 4 weeks of the season for them are brutal. And so if you haven't gotten to that total yet, you're betting against the odds, because it's going to be a challenge for them if they haven't gotten to that 8.5 wins to get into the playoffs, let alone win the Super Bowl or reach their season win total in the last month of the season.
Right. Although we've learned over the years that sometimes those last 6 games that look really brutal in August suddenly aren't as brutal in November,
Right,
December. I just like that
I think
team.
they have New England, I think, in the last month of the season. I think they have Denver in the last month of the season. So those two teams are not teams that over the course of the years have actually faded when it came to the end of the year.
They are 45-1. The Eagles 20-1. I think when you're talking about like the kind of fatter Super Bowl odds, Eagles 20-1 is interesting because they were 10-6 last year. Super easy division, great offense. There is a world in which you could see them going 12-4, 13-3. Who knows? 20-1 seems a little high for me.
I love the Eagles at 20-1. I think that in that division, you can't really count on the Cowboys. The Giants, they've looked horrible in preseason. Who knows what the Redskins are going to be. I actually love the Eagles at 20-1. The defense scares me a little bit, but I do think there's a good opportunity. And if they get to 12-4 and they do get an opportunity to have a first round bye, then all of a sudden you're going to be looking at the Eagles in December and they're going to be, those odds could be cut in half. And then you're looking at a good opportunity, Bill.
What do you back to San Diego for a second, because I want to talk about week one lines quickly with you. You're bullish on San Diego. I'm bullish on San Diego. Sal's bullish on San Diego. Like I've talked, there's enough people in my life who have sniffed this team out as a potential, like real mega sleeper. And yet I look at the week one lines and they're getting 3.5 points in Arizona on Monday night. Now you said the Sharps like San Diego too. Is this going to be the game that on like Sunday morning, all of a sudden San Diego's favored by a point?
I think the number is going to stay close to where it is. I think if anything, it might lean Arizona's way. And I think one of the reasons is that Arizona is one of those public teams because they did so well at the end of last year. People are thinking about them. It's the same way a couple of years ago, Detroit was one of those teams. And before that, St. Louis was one of those teams. They're one of those teams that everyone is getting excited about. When you see that, that's when you kind of want to start walking away. If we talk about, this will be a favorite term for all the analytics guys, but it's a regression to the mean. And last year they had a schedule that was favorable at the end of the year. And this year they've got a schedule that is much harder. And so a lot of wise guys I know have actually said they're walking away from Arizona from a season win total perspective. Meanwhile, the public is buying in because they saw how well the teams did last year. And San Diego is never going to be one of those teams that the public actually goes strong on because for years they've been burned. I mean, think about all those years North Turner was coaching this team, and everyone thought they're so talented, they're going to get out of the gate, and they spent September and October fumbling around and looking confused, and by November, they look like the team they were supposed to be, and they're scrambling to make the playoffs, if at all. So I think the public has generally been burned by San Diego. I think that they're high in Arizona, and that's why you're seeing a little bit extra half point. You're seeing the hook for the Chargers as being underdogs.
Were you surprised Packers getting so many points on Thursday night in Seattle, or is it just a 3-point bump now for Seattle in every home game?
I think, I think Seattle generally is going to be a 4-point favorite at home. If generally home field is worth 3 points, right? So Seattle, it's the best place to play for the Seahawks. It's the hardest place to play for people coming in on the road. You get an extra point for that, even though it's still Green Bay. And then knowing that the public is going to come in on Seattle because there's Super Bowl chance, you pump it up a little more. So now you're at -5. If the wise guys get money on Green Bay, I think they'll be perfectly happy about that. I've spoken to a couple guys at different sports books, both sort of sharp books and at books that cater more to the public. They haven't gotten a ton of money on Green Bay from the wise guys. This will be a public game. Everyone knows they're going to need that the books are going to need Green Bay in this game. The one thing that a guy did tell me is that they were getting some wise guy action on the over at 45.
Oh. Out of the bad teams, is there anyone the wise guys really like?
I think every single week that you see Jacksonville as a double-digit dog, the wise guys are going to be on Jacksonville.
I like Jacksonville too.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing it this week. The game opened at 11, it dropped down to 10. Now it's about 10.5, and I think anytime it's a double-digit, then they're going to be in Jacksonville. But you got to remember this. Last year, all year, the wise guys were on Jacksonville every single week. And every single week, they pretty much disappointed until they covered that historic 26, 27-point spread against the Broncos.
Yeah.
And then they started to find their footing a little bit. And at the end of the year, they started to be one of those teams that covered. But, as long as Jacksonville is a double-digit dog, they'll be on them.
What else are we missing? What else are you hearing? What else are the Sharps saying?
Oh, gosh. Let's see. Who else are they talking about? Buffalo. There was a lot of talk about Buffalo before
Good or bad?
Season started. What's that?
Good talk or bad talk?
Good talk. They were high in Buffalo for season win total. I thought that was great. I actually like Buffalo a lot. They're one of those teams that's really physical. I think they were third in the league in yards after contact, gaining yards after contact. I think that they're one of those teams that is young enough that they can start to believe if they get one close win. You think about it last year, I think there were 2 games they lost by a touchdown, 2 games they lost in overtime. Any one of those games goes the other way, and all of a sudden they're over their season win total. So there's been a lot of talk about can this team that seems to have talent get over the psychological hump of not being able to win close games. So I thought that was cool. I mean, I love Doug Marrone. I think he's a fantastic coach, and I think the jury's out on E.J. Manuel. I think the most interesting thing is going to be, how healthy can Sammy Watkins stay, because he's dynamic when he's playing. You see these vines of him making these one-handed catches, and they're phenomenal. But the challenge is keeping him on the field.
Is there a team that the wise guys, you mentioned Arizona, is there another team that the wise guys just hate? Just like there's no way that team's
I don't think anybody has any faith in Detroit. It's just, I think their win total was 8.5, maybe it was 8. And generally, they're just not a team that they have any trust in Matthew Stafford. The guy's got 51 interceptions the past few years. At the end of the game, are you honestly going to trust that Matthew Stafford isn't going to throw it away against Minnesota in a game, or against against the Bears in a game? So I think that's just what it comes down to. He seems to have regressed in terms of mechanics, is what everyone says, and I'm no expert in that, but certainly you can see that this is a team, no one's really that excited about the coach, and so there's just not a lot of faith that this is a team that they're going to want to put their money on.
What did you think? What is the most common Super Bowl pick you've heard?
Broncos, but that's just because it's Peyton Manning and they made it last year. You hear a lot about the Seahawks going back. What's interesting is that the team that everyone always expects to be going to the Super Bowl the past few years, in San Francisco, people were not high in them before they started having all those problems on their defensive line.
Yeah.
And so that was a team, I think their season win total was at 10.5.
Yeah.
A lot of wise guys were betting the under on that. I think they feel like Colin Kaepernick hadn't progressed, that division is so good, not just because of the Seahawks, but because of the Cardinals as well, and that they can give everybody a battle. And honestly, before Sam Bradford was injured, there was a lot of talk about the Rams, and sort of that everyone loves Jeff Fisher generally. So some of that sentiment might change a little bit now that Sam Bradford isn't playing for the Rams anymore. But certainly there's been enough strife on the 49ers defense that there hasn't been a lot of talk about going over the 10.5.
What kind of feedback did you get for the Jerry Jones piece that Don Van Natta did?
Oh, my gosh, it's been fantastic. He did such a great job on that story. It's one of my favorite stories that Don's done because he did a great job reporting it. Van Natta is as good a reporter as there is, but he did a phenomenal job of writing that story. It was just such great scenes and such great access, and he didn't pull any punches. The trick in those stories is always hard when you're a reporter on the road and you spend 3 months with a guy to not pull punches, to actually tell the truth of what you've seen, and not be worried about what the reaction is of a guy who you might have felt a relationship with. And Don didn't pull any punches, and the feedback that both he's gotten from people sort of in that community, and then the feedback generally from readers has been, you actually like Jerry Jones a little bit more. You feel like you understand what makes him tick, and it's not just all the showmanship, that there's a real drive and there's he's a more empathetic character, I think, than people might have made him out to be when you were just sort of getting these caricatures of Jerry Jones.
You had Ray Thompson's excellent piece on Jordan last year. I think it was the most read thing on ESPN.com last year. Is the Jerry Jones thing? Do you feel like that's going to be – because it feels like everybody was talking about it for 48 hours.
Honest to God, you know what has been the biggest talker so far? Tommy Tomlinson, a couple weeks ago, for the magazine for ESPN.com, wrote a story
Jared
about
Lorenzen thing?
Jared Lorenzen.
Lorenzen.
And that story blew up the internet. I mean, the amount of traffic it's done, it will rival what it will close to rival what Jordan did.
Wow.
Like millions of page views, and it's a great story. And what's interesting is, it's funny. The story came in, and I loved it. I thought it was great. But what I found fascinating was how many people have said to me that it resonated with them the challenges he faces with his weight, and that's something that they just identified with. And I think that's what made the story so popular. People they all feel empathy about that particular challenge. A lot of people struggle with that. A lot of people want to eat Little Debbie snack cakes all day. And the fact that it was something that potentially cost him his career, like he just couldn't stop eating and ate himself out of the NFL. I mean, you remember, this guy was amazing in college, and everyone sort of talks about the fact he's a 300-pound quarterback and the things he could do as an athlete at that size. And then he just sort of disappeared. And the fact that he's still out there trying to figure out what's next, people just, they understand that. He became human.
Well, that was a good one. Jerry Jones one was really good. And I can't for the life of me figure out why he'd want to have a reporter following him around for 3 months.
I know, right? Crazy, huh?
Yeah. I think I heard Van Adt on one of the ESPN radio shows, and he was saying that he just feels like it pisses Jerry Jones off that people don't give him credit for the Super Bowl 20 years ago, and he just has this maniacal need to prove that he knows football. And he thought, and Van Add's theory was he just thought Jerry Jones wanted somebody around that could trail him around, and he could kind of prove to the guy how much he knew.
I think that's exactly it. I think he still wants to be known as a football guy, and he struggles with the fact that Jimmy Johnson gets all that credit. What's interesting is that Jimmy Johnson had a comment that came out that basically said, Jerry Jones is still the same guy that he was when I was there, and he still has a lot of animosity for it. And so I think it's a fascinating character study, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with this Cowboys team, because Jerry Jones clearly is the one running it, and any success that it has now is he's going to want the credit for it, and I think that drives him more than anything.
Chad Millman, we were both in the Super contest. We both did terrible last year. Hopefully we will both do better. Year 5 for me. My best year is my first year. I've never matched it.
I think the pool was up to like $2 million, and the winner might get like $700,000. So we got to be in it to win it, man. We got to focus. We got to be strong every week. Every game counts.
All right. Stop working so hard. And check out Chad's podcast. Was it Behind the Bets it's called, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So check that out once a week?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And you already know about ESPN.com, ESPN Magazine, all the other stuff Chad does. Thank you for coming on. Talk to you during the season.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you having me.
So I get % off. Whoa.
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.